Dean of St Albans, Geoffrey John, has accused the Church in Wales of denying him a bishop's mitre because he's gay and in a civil partnership. Dr John was a candidate for the See of Llandaff and believed he had strong support in the diocese, but he didn't get a two-thirds majority in the electoral college, which met to choose a new bishop, and the Welsh bishops have now produced a shortlist which doesn't include him. A group of 9 Welsh MPs have called for the election to be rerun. Madeleine Moon is the Labour MP for Bridgend, and she talked to Dan Tierney.
Writing to the bishops wasn't something that I did easily. I wrote because I was approached by so many people locally expressing concern. Now, part of the problem, just to explain the situation for those in England who might not appreciate this, the church in Wales is disestablished. So there's no obvious mechanism, as we have in the Church of England, for scrutiny by MPs or indeed by the Welsh Assembly. And this leaves clergy and other church officers vulnerable to inadequate processes and activities that really are damaging to the church's reputation.
And yet, as you say, the church in Wales is not the established church. So is it really the place of MPs to be getting involved in the way that the church elects its bishops?
Well, we can in England, but we can't in Wales. And the issue wasn't about the process. The issue was what happened within the process. Is it right that in the meeting to consider the appointment of one individual, all of the positive attributes that this person could bring to that role had been overshadowed by a simple focus on sexuality? Now, given that the Church in Wales is very clear that sexuality is not an issue and not a bar, how had this happened? And that was the question that we were asking.
But what evidence have you got to support those claims?
Well, I can only say that people who were present informed me of what they saw and heard. And it was because of that that I took the step of speaking to my colleagues and writing to the bishops. Now, at no point have I had a reply which is very clearly saying, no, that was never an issue.
That was Madeleine Moon. Well, Geoffrey John himself complained about the election process in a letter to the Rt Rev'd John Davies, the Bishop of Swansea and Brecon. I asked Bishop Davies to respond to the MP's remarks.
It would be quite silly of me to deny that Dr John, the Dean of St Albans, was one of the candidates in this election. But one of the things I find myself in difficulty with is that, like all the other electors, I made a declaration of confidentiality, which doesn't technically allow me to talk about nomination lists, doesn't allow me to talk about the discussion of candidates, or indeed talk about the ballots. But I can answer the point that Madeleine Moon has said, because I think it needs to be said, that everybody present at the college acknowledged the very many gifts that Dr John has, and those gifts were put before the college at significant length and in great detail. So for anybody to suggest that, as it were, there was an imbalance in what was said, I think I'd have to say is a distortion of the truth.
I understand what you say about confidentiality, but the fact is that this has become a public debate.
Indeed, it has, sadly.
Well, let me put to you some of the questions that are raised so that we can get the facts straight. Is Geoffrey John right when he says that in the votes, although he didn't achieve the two-thirds majority, which would have meant that he had to be given the position, he did get the majority of votes?
That's something that I'm not prepared to answer, because that's discussion of ballots.
The problem is that if you don't clear up things like that, people are going to have the suspicion that what we've just heard is right, that it was the question of his sexuality that tipped the balance.
Yeah, the issue of his sexuality was clearly an issue before the college. The issue of sexuality of all the candidates was before the college, because there were others present and nominated, although I can't say who they were, who were also gay.
But why was that an issue?
We have in the Church in Wales a number of serving clergy who are gay, a number of serving clergy who are in civil partnerships. We have in the Church in Wales, unlike the Church of England, 2 dioceses where we have appointed LGBT chaplains. We have issued prayers, unlike the Church of England, which can be used with those who are in same-sex relationships. In church. So this idea that the church in Wales is homophobic is quite frankly ridiculous.
But given all that, why was the issue of sexuality even something that had to be discussed and raised in the Electoral College?
Because I was asked the question about it.
And that was the extent of it, was it? I mean, that's as far as it went.
Yes. Members of the college, when speaking about candidates, are encouraged to be honest, but they also have to be respectful in what they say, because, you'd understand, I'm sure, that we are talking about individuals, we're talking about their personal lives. We would say something about their qualities, their suitability, and so on. But there might also be issues that we might want others in the college to think about in terms of suitability. But in terms of my chairing it, I'm not, as it were, on my own. There are present at the college as support staff and as advisors the provincial secretary of the province, who's the Archbishop's registrar, the deputy Archbishop's registrar, and perhaps more importantly, the head of legal services, so that if anything is said that is deemed to be less than honest, less than respectful, or inappropriate, anything like that is said by any member of the college, I would be advised about that, even if I hadn't thought it myself. And at no point in the college did any advice come my way to indicate that anything unfair had been said.
There's a very important point of fact in that case here, isn't there? Because in his letter to you, he said two things, which I'll quote. One, in the course of a discussion, a number of homophobic remarks were made and were left unchecked and reprimanded by the chair. And two, more importantly, the only arguments adduced against my appointment, in particular by two of the bishops, were directly related to my homosexuality and or civil partnership. Is that true?
I can't say that it was used against his appointment. It was raised by certain members of the college as a question of fact.
Well, what, as a neutral fact or as a fact that made the decision pointed in a particular way?
I'm afraid we're getting into territory now which, not because I don't want to discuss it, but because I've made a declaration of confidentiality, which won't impress some people, I'm sure. But I've already indicated to you at the start of the interview that in terms of the detailed discussions of what was said at the college, I think I would be breaking a solemn promise if I were to go into it.
Bishop Davies of Swansea and Brecon in